Hi, everyone. My name is Purnima Sundar, and I'm with the Ontario Centre of Excellence for Child and Youth Mental Health, and I want to welcome you to our session this morning called Managing High-Risk Situations in Virtual Care. This is the second in our series of virtual care webinars that we're offering to school service providers and community-based child and youth mental health service providers together, along with folks who are delivering services in wellness hubs. So again, thank you so much for joining us. For those who aren't aware of what we do at our center, we work with Ontario's community-based child and youth mental health organizations to ensure evidence-based service delivery, and along with our partners at School Mental Health Ontario and at Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario, are really, really pleased to be welcoming a panel of wonderful experts who have lots and lots of experience and expertise that they're going to share with us today. Maybe what I'll do is I will pass it over to Kathy to just introduce herself and say a few words about School Mental Health Ontario. Over to you.
Thanks, Purnima. I want to echo my thanks to each of you for taking the time to join us today and to learn together. For those of you who don't know School Mental Health Ontario, we are a provincial implementation support team working alongside school boards across the province to promote student mental health. And today we're joined by panelists from many parts of the province, from several mental health disciplines, and who work with community, school, and hospital settings. And we're just so grateful for their willingness to share their thinking and expertise when it comes to managing difficult scenarios in virtual care. I think having the range of experiences represented will help to enhance our collective learning. So thanks to all of them. So I'll turn it to Dr. Joanna Hamilton. Joanna?
Thanks, Kathy, and thanks everyone for joining us today. I'm Joanna Henderson. I'm the Executive Director of Youth Wellness Hubs Ontario, and we are, for those of you who might not know, we're a one-stop shop model of service delivery for youth aged 12 to 25. And in response to the pandemic, we've been able to pivot our services to primarily virtual services, but also with some in-person services continuing. And we've done that in collaboration. In part, what makes our model unique is we work very collaboratively with young people to plan service delivery and to plan all aspects of the model of service delivery. So thank you very much for joining us today, and I'll turn it back over to Purnima.
Great, thanks Joanna and Kathy. So I'll just start by saying just a couple of words about how we ended up here today. The way that we have structured this session is really to support you all to increase your confidence and comfort level with providing virtual care in high-risk situations when you're working with young people and their families. What we will cover is it's listed on the agenda slide that was rolling. A number of different areas today focused on how do you engage families in virtual care, how do you assess and manage risky situations, what are some evidence-based practice considerations, how do you troubleshoot and navigate any issues that happen to crop up when you're providing care, and also we're gonna wrap up by talking a little bit about how to care for all of yourselves as you're delivering this really intensive sort of care to families. What we won't cover is specific platforms. Again, that's very much something that we'll leave for another time. But any questions that you have related to that, I think, can be answered best by people that are the purveyors of those platforms. In terms of French, one of the things we did do was invite questions from folks who are Francophone service providers. We invited you to submit your questions in French. Unfortunately, we don't have any Francophone service providers that are able to deliver this webinar, but what we will do at the end of the webinar is compile all of the questions and provide summaries of basically what the experts are saying today on our webinar, and that will be available in both French and English. So the way that we have structured the session today was because of the short timeline, so it's only an hour that we have together, and we wanted to make sure that everybody got a chance to have their sort of top questions answered. So when you registered, you were invited to submit questions. What our team did was roll up all of those questions, and we've given it to the panelists to respond to. So what you'll see today is a very tight quick transitions between each of the speakers who are going to address all of the questions, hopefully, that you folks have around virtual care. If you do have additional questions, please feel free to put them in the chat. We won't be answering them during this session, but we will compile them and ask our panelists to respond to them afterwards, and that will be in the Q&A that will follow. One last note is that the recording of the webinar will be available on our website. And so once the webinar is over, if you have people that are interested in taking a look, please do feel free to share that link with them, and we'll make that available to everyone. And so before I hand it over to our first speaker, I'll just introduce all of the speakers on our panel today. First, we have Michelle Bates, who's the Manager of Professional Support Staff and the Mental Health Lead at the Halton District School Board. Michelle, maybe do you want to give a wave to folks? There you go. Then we have Michelle Dermengian, who is the Director of Child and Youth Services at HANDS, the Family Help Network.ca. Then we have Dr. Hazen Gandy, who's a child and adolescent psychiatrist at CHIO and also the Medical Director of CHIO's Telemental Health Service. And then we have Kathy Mcdonald, who works with Michelle Bates. She's a school social worker and attendance counselor at the Georgetown District High School, and Gary Allen in Oakville. And finally, last but not least, we have Amanda Shaw, who's our child and family therapist at HANDS, the Family Help Network.ca. So welcome to all the panelists, welcome to all of you, and I will start everything off by passing it over to Kathy Mcdonald.
Okay, hi everybody, good morning. Thank you everybody for having me today. As was said, my name is Kathy. I am a school social worker with the Halton District. With the Halton District School Board. And so today I just wanted to provide some insight into my experience providing virtual direct practice to students within the Halton region. And so I hope that that information either, validates your own experiences or provides you with a few pieces of information to think on. This section really focuses on engaging students and building that therapeutic alliance, especially in situations of high risk. So when I was considering this question, I really wanted to highlight those things that may be different from when we're engaging with students who aren't in that high risk category, and what that looks like in a virtual world. So for me, that really came down to preparedness, connection, and safety. I also think that the intent of this question is to focus on building that alliance with new clients as opposed to existing clients, because that has been a very different experience. So I'll try to keep my focus on newer clients. So in terms of preparation for COVID, or prior to COVID, I really had easy access to teachers, guidance counselors, and admin in the schools that I work within. So meeting in person was just so simple. I didn't have to go out of my way to ask, to find people and hunt them down and to schedule appointments. I could just go and ask a question. So now I'm having to be a lot more mindful in what I'm asking and the space and time that I do have with staff, because I can't just go to the office next door. So just a little bit more preparedness in my process. Even my office space has been another challenge. I had my office organized in a way that I could access resources and information seamlessly. And, when we couple that with a control over the student's physical location, we're creating a lot of new challenges. So I had to adjust my practice. I tried to bring my office, my work office to a home office and kind of replicate that feeling of an office, and making sure the same things that I had posted in my office at my school location is similar to what I have at home. So it does feel like a welcoming environment and reflects who I am as a social worker and what messages I want to share. At the beginning of COVID, social workers within the Halton School Board, we were asked to create documents that would be helpful in the transition to virtual service. So we created, or we had a team of social workers who created a wonderful virtual care document, and that gave us the framework to work from when we're faced with challenging situations. So this meant that I really actually have easy access to scripts, assessment tools, planning documents, suicide assessments, updated links to community resources that reflect COVID. So it's just a matter of me, selecting a couple of hyperlinks, and I'm so prepared to support my student I'm able to complete a thorough assessment, and I'm able to plan for future steps while continuing to build rapport. So this leads a little bit to our use of technology and ways that we can use it to our own advantage. I know for some it might be very scary, but there is so many pros to being able to use technology well. And when we were able to be clear and concise with that direction, we can really help lower risk and bring an element of confidence to our clients. And we know that if a client feels confident in us, that it's easier to build rapport with them. I've had a lot of conversations about, well, what do we do if technology fails? What if the Wi-Fi connection isn't working? So we have plans for that. I make sure to let students know if something's going on, we can shut down, we can reschedule. You're going to receive an email from me. I'm not just going to leave that student high and dry. Just maybe a few kind of thoughts I've had on engaging students. And I want to acknowledge that some of these really fall into those basic social work skills, but I've had to reassess everything that I do. And I think there's an importance in a really solid foundation, even when working with high-risk students, even more perhaps when working with high-risk students. So I found pacing a little bit difficult in the beginning. I struggled to find a good pace, and I missed seeing those nonverbal cues that I would have in person. So I don't want to send the message to the client that I'm rushing them or that I'm not paying attention. So I really just had to slow down. We're not seeing people in the same way. We're seeing eye movement, but we're not seeing eye contact. So I'm paying more attention to those things. And there's things that a student can't see, and what I can't see. So outside of this box that we're in, you can't see anything that's happening, which is nice when you don't want to wear, jeans to work and you want to wear sweatpants. Nobody knows that information. But we just have to be careful of things being misinterpreted as disinterest. So I know I like to take notes during a session. And so I might be tapping on the computer and clicking away, and they might be wondering, like, what is going on with her? Why is she not focusing on me? What is that noise? So I want to make sure that I'm informing my client of the things that I'm doing so that they know and are aware of things that we've never really had to address before. I also I want to take a moment to say that we really need to recognize people's social locations, their lived experiences, especially in conjunction with the current political climate. So I know it's important for me to send a message to students that I'm competent and open to talking to students about really difficult and sensitive areas, such as race, gender, sexuality, class, ability, all of those different things. So I find ways to weave that in through my sessions, whether it be through the representations around me, such as the things that are in my office, or things that I'm going to be intentionally asking them. So find ways to send that message and let people know that you are a safe person. How they're feeling about what is going on right now impacts their lives. And I think we have a duty to address that. And if you do struggle with comfortability with addressing things like race, then go out and educate yourself. Ask your team to help educate you and give them information. So really share that and join teams and committees that talk about these issues. Just a final area while I wrap up here is I wanted to touch on privacy and confidentiality. So our control over this has changed in the virtual world. So we're going to need to name those external factors that may impede on the session. So for example, if you're a clinician who's in a home with others, you might be interrupted. I know in my apartment, I have a fire alarm that goes off almost daily. It's become a bit of a running joke with some of my clients. So I'm trying to find humor in that and making sure that students just know what's going on. We're naming it, we're normalizing it. There's also some elements that I can't control in a student's environment. So things like who's coming in and out of the room of that student's private space. So for example, if someone is listening in or enters the room during a session. So just a few of the tactics that I've kind of used to help with these situations is maybe asking the client to wear headphones while we talk. For some of my clients, I might need to have a code word so I know when I have to be quiet on my end. Or if they shut the computer, I know that it's not because they don't want to continue the session with me, but that they just, maybe they have a safety issue in that moment and they're going to reconnect with me when it's possible. So thank you for listening. I'm going to pass it over to Michelle Bates to see if she's anything that she just wants to add into this section.
Thank you, Kathy. So just to add a few further ideas related to privacy and confidentiality. And to underscore that privacy and confidentiality are safety issues. We're mindful that for our students that we support, they may not have shared with their family that they are receiving counseling from school-based support. And if they have, they may not have shared with their family members the nature or purpose of the counseling. It's much easier to protect that in a school environment because families don't know when students are coming in and out of the school social worker office. But of course, all that changes virtually. In terms of risk situations, it's important that we have the opportunity to reflect on what do I know about my client, their family, and or even their living situation, and how can this alert me? How can I keep central in my mind risk situations or potential risk situations? We also have done lots of talking about to consider whether or not the contact information that we have is only for the intended client. So for example, if the contact information is to a family's home phone, we've advised staff to simply indicate that you're calling from the school. Hi, it's Kathy from the school, not hi, it's Kathy, the school social worker from the school. As Kathy noted, we have developed virtual practice guidelines, and in those, our social workers are guided, and we've provided scripts to talk about the limits of privacy and confidentiality, whether it's through phone and or online. Now I'll turn it over to Amanda.
Thanks, Kathy and Michelle. So I'm going to be speaking to how to assess and manage risky situations, specifically if we're dealing with conflict or violence in a virtual care session. One of the questions that was raised was managing conflict specifically between caregivers and a youth in a virtual session. So building off of a lot of what Kathy and Michelle have shared, obviously conflict and high risk, those are terms that can encompass a lot of different presenting issues or challenges. But if there is known conflict between a youth and a caregiver and they're going to be engaging in virtual care with you, I think first and foremost, we need to assess if family sessions are appropriate at this time and clinically recommended. And also if the client's ready to engage in that process. When working with a family unit, there may be times where family members may need to access their own therapist or mental health supports. With our agency, we frequently work with complex high-risk youth, and at times one therapist will work individually with the client or youth and another therapist work with the family to ensure that both are given opportunities to develop skills around emotion regulation and mental health to prepare them to engage in that process. But obviously as well, in child and youth mental health, especially in a virtual setting, as Kathy had mentioned, we can't always predict what's going to happen or what concerns or challenges a youth or family may bring to the session. So overall, we want to be prepared. And again, recognizing that youth that you may have worked with previously and maybe didn't have a high risk for conflict or violence in the home, given recent events over the last few months and even the last couple weeks, we need to be always prepared to assess those situations. I would say in preparing, first and foremost, we want to learn about our community partners. What resources are available that you may need to call upon if a high-risk situation or crisis does occur? That could include your local child and youth mental health services, crisis services. Are there medical practitioners involved in the client's care, emergency services, your local child protection agencies and hospital, etc. And also wanting to ensure that the information you have about our community partners is up to date related to any restrictions due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Again, in preparing for work with a virtual client, it's all going to depend. Is it a new referral? Is it an initial session? Is it referral from crisis? We always want to be exploring any high risk factors with the client or youth and with the family. And with consent, it's an opportunity to gather information from community partners or those referral sources. I would also recommend that at the start of any session or the start of services when working with the youth and caregivers, if they're both going to be involved particularly, you want to develop and clearly identify what the expectations, the boundaries, and what I would call maybe sort of rules of engagement are going to be. And you want to gather input and collaboration with the youth and those caregivers. So what are the expectations around language, around behavior in the session, clarifying the roles for each person involved, and the steps that would be taken if in a session things escalated or a crisis occurred, so that everyone knows what to expect. Recommend reviewing I feel statements, healthy communication strategies with the family or client prior to initiating those virtual care sessions in high conflict situations. Also reviewing with the client and family when to take a break, when to take a pause, what that will look like. And if there is a virtual session where there is an escalation or crisis occurs, ensuring that you're scheduling appropriate follow-up and a time to debrief with each person that was present. You know, crisis and high risk take a toll on our bodies and our emotions, and we need to give access to that, as well as you as the clinician to be ensuring that you're accessing supervision. Some of the recommendations might be the use of a talking stick in a high conflict session, something to try to navigate who's going to speak when. Also, when we're doing this in a virtual setting, there can be a lag time in communication, which can lead to people speaking over one another, often unintentionally, and that can sometimes increased chance of conflict or escalation between a youth and caregivers. So asking people maybe if that's happening to count in their head to 2 or 3 just to give a pause. Could they write down some of their thoughts or ideas that they want to share for the session? As well, we always want to be involving safety planning. Safety plans can be used with clients who have a variety of risk factors. We sometimes think of safety planning in the terms of suicide risk or self-harm, but really safety plans should be used with all high-risk clients. That can include, the mental health symptoms. Is it a volatile home environment? Is the youth in an unstable living environment? Again, when developing a safety plan, we want to be planning that with the client and with any family members or caregivers or supports that are available. We always want to be specific. So what are the coping strategies that either the client already has or that you're working on developing? What calm down strategies can they use? Particularly in a high risk conflict home environment, we want to know what are the resources that they can access within the home and also outside of the home, including specific strategies like, is it going to be listening to music? So if a client's feeling emotionally escalated, can they put on a song? Review with the client, what kind of playlist do they have? What kind of emotions do certain songs elicit for them? Maybe you want to listen to the songs with them in a session and walk them through the process of using that as a grounding technique or a calm down strategy. In the safety plan, if the client's indicating they want to go for a walk, where are they going to go for a walk? How long would they go for a walk? So really being as specific as possible. Again, when developing a safety plan, you want to review it with client, with caregivers. We want to be including crisis contacts, numbers, supports. Who are the support people they can reach out to? What are their phone numbers? What are the emergency services or mental health crisis lines? We want to lay it out, document it, whether that's right now, it might be documenting, and there's a ton of safety planning apps available. Also, are they going to write it in their phone, write it on a piece of paper and take a photo of it, making sure that all parties have access to that safety plan and that it's easily and readily available. Also, if you're conducting a session with youth and caregivers present and you know that there is a history of conflict, we want to develop a safe word. Again, as I think Kathy had mentioned, the use of safe words or code language can help youth indicate to you as a clinician that they need to take a pause or they need to step away for a moment without having to go into the whole context of what's happening for them. If the client abruptly disengages from a virtual session due to a conflict or escalation, we want to include in that safety plan, is there a support person in the home environment that you as the clinician can contact with consent from that client, so that you can communicate and help facilitate further assessment and management of that situation. Another benefit that I use is the use of scales. So again, a 1 to 10 scale, 10 being the worst, 1 being the best, or vice versa. And you can use those with clients and even family members to gauge what emotional states everyone in. How is their emotion regulation? What are their feelings of safety in those moments? Again, with consent from clients, you may want to provide the caregivers or family members an individual separate session so that you can work with them to assess the conflict, the situation that's taking place in the home, and help them in support and development of their skills. With the clients and family members in a high risk or conflict virtual session, we want to be practicing our coping skills right in the moment. Grounding techniques, breathing, progressive relaxation, listen to a song. I work with one child who's high risk. We take a break. If things are mounting, if that kid is able to identify when they're being triggered, let's pause and have a dance party virtually, and I'll engage in that with them. Take the opportunity to engage with high-risk clients in the moment where they are. And I think virtual care and technology has given us a real benefit with that. For example, having a client who's in the hospital right now and can't have family members or supports with them, or maybe they don't even have access to those types of resources, being able to be on the phone with a client during, for example, their stay in an emergency department, a situation I had recently, being able to be on the phone with them throughout the entire stay, walking them through their coping skills, using their safety plan, relaxation scripts. Again, I think a benefit of virtual and home-based care right now is that it gives us increased access to a client's home environment and the family members, supports, and caregivers who are there that we maybe wouldn't have had prior to COVID or when we were working in an office or a school-based setting. It's an opportunity to meet those individuals, to get to know them, and to potentially involve them in the therapeutic process in new ways. I found one neat aspect is we're meeting family pets, often for the first time. And those are great resources for calm down strategies, to be involved in safety planning. And again, a really unique opportunity with the increased access in the home environment is increased access to being able to assess and manage family dynamics. People are often more comfortable, I found, in the home environment opposed to if they were in an office with us. So when we're engaging virtually, also remembering individuals may not always be aware of how much we can see on screen or how much we can hear, and taking those pieces into account when you're completing an assessment. We also want to acknowledge, again, that the high-risk situations and conflict that these families are living through and recent events are probably adding to stress levels. And so ensuring that maybe we're doing additional check-ins with not only the client and youth, but the family members as well. How is the whole unit functioning together? Are there issues or challenges being presented, and a plan for how to address that? And ultimately, again, as clinicians and mental health workers, we're using many of the same skills we used in an in-person, face-to-face setting virtually. We need to adapt and be creative, but remembering to feel confident in the skills that we had, 3 to 4 months ago, and that we're just transferring those into a new platform. Another question that came out was, how do I facilitate treatment for youth in a volatile home or family situation? So again, building off of what we already talked about, I would say in addition, working with the youth to determine a safe space to conduct that virtual session. Discuss with them, what's their home look like? What's the layout? Who's going to be in the home? What are the various areas that could be an option for conducting a session? Is it in the home, outside, in the car? It's summertime, the weather's getting better. Can they go for a walk? Obviously reviewing any implications to confidentiality that may come with a change of location. Could they put on music or a fan? Again, could they use headphones to increase their privacy? At the start of each session, when I'm working with a high-risk client, I always want to ask them where they are in the home, who's in the home with them, are they safe? And then again, informing client of similar information for yourself. Where am I in my home? So for example, what are you doing to increase confidentiality? I'm using a fan, I have headphones in, my door is closed. Letting them know who you live with, who's in your environment. I will make one note with that. I have a client who does have some increased tendency to paranoid thoughts. And so always at the start of session wants me to show them virtually who's in the room with me and clarify that there is nobody. I personally am in a small living environment and I have to work out of my bedroom. And so one quick note would be always make your bed and make sure that that environment is sort of prepared in case the client does ask you to see what space you're in. Again, if the youth is in a volatile home environment, we want to be developing that safety plan, crisis context, what's a safe place that they could go, lay it out, document it, have it easily available. Again, developing the use of safe words, code language to be used in a session when discussing sensitive content. If the client is high risk and they need to use a code word to indicate that they're going to have to disengage for a moment, but a safety plan that I will call you back in 5 minutes from an alternate location. Again, we want to be also collaborating with the client around the timing of the session. Is there a day of the week that's better regarding who might be in the home, or a time of day that's better? Would they prefer phone via texting or a phone call or a video session? What's going to make them feel safest and most comfortable? And again, also providing them with tools, wellness plans, and journals that they can use to access those supports outside of the virtual session, and informing your clinical team as needed around alert systems, risk factors, or safety plans. Another question that was raised was, what are my duties to report? With that, I would just say, if you have questions or concerns around violence, abuse, or neglect, just to name a few, you need to call your local child protection agency or Children's Aid Society. They're often available to discuss hypothetical situations, to provide direction around next steps, and always wanting to access clinical supervision and reaching out to your managers for support. And then finally, what would it look like for follow-up when managing a high-risk situation virtually, particularly when collaborating with service providers? So when providing support for high-risk clients, particularly children and youth, we want to be bringing as many community partnerships to the table to access those resources. One example would be, I work primarily with high-risk and complex needs in my practice, and I did have one client who had multiple high-risk factors, limited access to basic needs, high-risk mental health factors. Client had no home supports, and through the assessment process, it became clear that this client actually had a lot of involvement with police. Just as a check-in method, they would often check on her in the community to make sure she was accessing what she needed. So with client consent, I was able to collaborate with our local law enforcement to make them aware of some of her mental health needs, changes to her risk factors based on COVID-19 and a few other pieces, and be able to make sure that we were collaborating on the same page and working together to meet those client needs. I'll now pass it over to Dr. Hazen Gandy.
Okay, thanks, Amanda. You've been very comprehensive in covering a lot of ground, and some of it kind of overlaps with some of my comments. I was asked to talk a bit about assessing risk as it applies to suicide. And there was kind of three questions that bubbled up. One was, how do I recognize risk in a virtual session, a risk for suicide in a virtual session, and are there any tools to assess that? How do I respond to that risk if it's identified in a virtual session, and how can I engage in safety planning around suicide? So I think the first really important part is looking at sort of the setup of the session. And Amanda's made a lot of comments that I think are very, very salient. I pay close attention to aspects of the session, mostly because I want to be able to ensure that I can manage perhaps the worst case scenario, and I'll talk a little bit about that. But to do that, there's sort of three components that I would consider important. One is to look at, to ensure that you have consent, that the young person that you're going to be interviewing or speaking with is agreeing with the session and how it's set up, and understands for the most part, in a general sense, the content of what's going to be discussed. Also really important to pay attention to limits of confidentiality. In these sessions, we're going to be, we are asking our clients to talk about perhaps highly sensitive information, perhaps very distressing information, and it's important for them to understand how we're going to manage that information if it comes to us. What are things that we will keep confidential? What are things that they may disclose to us that we would say up front we're going to need to share and manage if they disclose this information. Amanda's made some great points about creating a safe space, and I think of the space both from a physical perspective. Is it a quiet place? Is it a place without distractions? Is it a private space? Is it a space where they feel they're kind of safe to disclose confidential information? And the same goes for the space that I'm in. Can they see that I'm in a private space? Can they be assured that I'm going to be able to provide a quiet and safe space for them? And this is important both from a physical perspective, but also from a psychological perspective. I've had a couple of young people in my practice who have said, you know, I'd like to be able to do this session virtually, but I don't actually feel safe that I can talk and other people won't hear me. I live in a small apartment with 2 or 3 other people, and I'm not sure that I can speak and someone's not going to overhear me. So making sure that those issues are identified up front is important. In the session, important to identify who's going to be present. Lots of kids are very comfortable to be interviewed in the presence of their parents or their caregivers. Some would say, I'm okay to do some things with my parents, but other things I might want to speak about privately. And I talk about sort of the negotiations for that up front. But a cardinal rule that I usually follow is that if I'm going to be speaking with a young person who may be at risk in some way, particularly with respect to suicide, if I'm going to interview them alone, I want to make sure that there's going to be another person who will be physically available. Again, in the worst case scenario, if I'm speaking with a young person who discloses suicidal ideation, and it's either hard for me to identify what is the level of risk, or they've identified that they're at very high risk, I want to make sure that there is another person who can be immediately available to provide supervision and support to that person. And should the person I'm interviewing, they may choose to end the session in the middle of a conversation about suicidal ideation or walk out of the room. In that situation, really important for me to be able to contact an identified support person who is physically available, so that I can ensure that if I am not able to pursue the information in the session, that there is another responsible person whom I can speak with, who can be able to provide support and kind of take control of the circumstances. Now, if I have all of that in place, just coming back to the notion of what are some of the tools that can be used to identify suicide risk. And I'm going to actually sort of introduce you to a specific tool that I think is very well suited for the virtual environment. And this tool is called the ASQ. Some of you may be familiar with this. This is called the Ask Suicide Screening Questions. This is a tool developed by the National Institute of Mental Health in the US. And if you Google, we'll provide links to this toolkit. But if you Google NIMH ASQ, the first thing you'll come up with is the website, and it goes directly to the ASQ toolkit. So this toolkit actually was updated recently to provide an algorithm sort of in the COVID environment. So on the website, they have, again, just a nice one-page summary of the algorithm that walks you through exactly what you can do to assess a young person who may have suicidal ideation. The first part of that tool is something called the screening tool. Again, a very simple one-page document. In this screening tool, it is simply asks 5 questions. The first 4 questions really look at past evidence of suicidal ideation, present evidence of suicidal ideation. And the 5th question really asks, are you at immediate risk or danger? If they answer no to it, it's a simple yes or no. If they answer no to all of those questions, this tool has been validated to be able to give you some assurance that if they answer no to all these questions, their suicide risk is really low. If they answer yes to the first 4, one of the first 4 questions, then probably some further evaluation is required. And if they answer yes to the 5th question, which really talks about risk, are you having thoughts of killing yourself right now? That tells you that you need to intervene immediately. And if you go through that process and you identify that there is some risk, then they have another one-page tool called the Brief Suicide Assessment Tool, Safety Assessment Tool. And it goes through in detail how to elicit the information to give you a sense of what is the level of risk. So it looks at symptom assessment, suicidal ideation, and exactly what thoughts people are having, etc. Looks at whether they have a plan, is there past behavior, are there other mental health symptoms. It also prompts you to be able to assess, are there supports, is there a support network for the individual, goes through a specific safety planning. It also helps you sit down with a parent or care provider to walk through, okay, we've identified this young person has suicidal ideation. Here's the level of risk. What are our next steps? And it talks a little bit about how to determine a disposition to help you eventually identify what kids may be low risk, what kids may require further evaluation, and what kids may be at high or imminent risk in which there may need to be immediate action. So this is a very straightforward easy to administer, comprehensive tool that you can easily use in the virtual environment to assess risk. All right, I'm now going to turn things over to Kathy.
Hi again, everybody. So I'm just going to speak a little bit about, adjustment of our services and things that we're taking into consideration in our virtual care world. So when considering what to adjust in my delivery of evidence-based services, I really just had to take a pause. We're in a really unique situation. I don't know about you, but I've never provided virtual service during a global pandemic before. So if you have any evidence-based practice research on that, please send it my way. So we at the Halton School Board, we really took a step back, and we're trying to focus on where students are right now. We're going to try to focus on containing student needs and crisis intervention. So the Halton School social work team, we've recently, or some of us are still continuing to do the CPD course through Laurier. We also have done burst training, and some of us have DBT training. So that really continues to inform our lens that we're using with students. It can't be delivered in its purest form. So we're really moving into that informed avenue. So I'm still helping students, connect how their thoughts, feelings, and behaviors are being impacted during the school closure. But we're just adjusting that. So we're being thoughtful. We're also being thoughtful now, and what are our next steps going to be? Is this going to be our reality for a little bit longer? So how do we move from that containment and crisis to providing our services maybe in a more thorough manner, or with more DBT and CPT skills and all of that sort of stuff enveloped in? So that's something that we're beginning to focus on. We're also, we really make sure that we have access to CBT tools, DBT tools, and resources that we often use. So those have been transitioned into our online drives. And as I was talking about before with that virtual care document, I had really quick and easy access to these things. I also want to say, I'm going to just skip a few things just to be conscious of time, but I really want to send the message that we're going back to the basics. We're building that strong foundation. We're meeting the client where they're at. We're being flexible, and we're doing as much safety planning as possible. And when there is more than one service provider involved, we're spending that time defining those roles so that we're staying in our own lanes and making sure that, all of the elements of our students' needs are covered. And we're just doing the work that we need to do in this moment. I do want to spend a little bit of time talking about frequency and length of sessions when working in high-risk situations. Again, we have to be flexible to the needs of students, but also while maintaining those professional boundaries. So boundaries just might include, informing students of our hours of availability. That might change depending on your own life. We also have to let them know how can we be accessed and what information should be shared through those forms of communication. So for us at the HDSB, we have very strict guidelines for electronic communication with students, and that it's only used for very specific things. And when I'm clear and concise with students and I tell them these things, they're very respectful of my boundaries. I make sure to tell them that my cell phone is programmed to turn off at 4:30 p.m. and I don't receive your text. The phone has been programmed to block all incoming information until the next workday stops. So they can't be texting me at 8 a.m. or 8 p.m. and that sort of thing. One just kind of final thing to touch on is we need to keep an eye out for fatigue during our sessions. On my side, it can be exhausting, so we have to keep an eye out on their side as well. We lose a lot of those physical cues, especially when we're conducting phone sessions. So I really try to have frequent check-ins within the session, especially when we're discussing a topic that I know is difficult for them. In the video sessions, I'm able to pick up with those physical cues. I've noticed a great deal of looking away from the camera, even hiding, moving the camera so they're no longer in view when we are engaging in those difficult situations. So those are like the new physical cues that I'm looking for. And we know students, we have to be more direct with students who do have those higher needs on the length of session and how often we meet. So to those students, I've been saying, you know, we're going to meet weekly, or we're going to meet bi-weekly. We're going to keep the session short. We're going to keep it contained. We're going to have goals during that session. But I also try to offer a little bit of flexibility in terms of those things, just kind of keeping in mind. It's a really tricky balance to find. And yeah, so I'm going to pass it over to Michelle D, and she's just going to finish up this section. Thank you, everybody.
Hello, and thank you, everybody, for letting us have this time. I'm going to take a number of questions that have come from you. There are so many good questions that have been provided. I'm going to try to speak fairly quickly and just really highlight the top pieces. We have about 8 minutes left and 4 presentations. So I'm just going to try to lump mine all into one and really highlight some of those key pieces. Again, thank you for the questions and the focus for today. A couple of the questions in terms of the special considerations that had come forward had been, how do we address children in the early years? And I think engagement tools are critically important. So if we think of very young children and how we would typically engage with them, whether it's in a home-based setting, a daycare setting, an office-based, a school-based setting, wherever we might have previously provided that mental health treatment, is that young children like to play. They engage side by side in sessions, which is really for an online where we're together. And so we need to consider, what are they supposed to do with their hands and their eyes while working with me now in an online session? Does that maybe include drawing, acting? Amanda talked about the dance sessions, playing with their toys, showing me something. It needs to be really active and engaging. We are not going to be as exciting as their game that they get to play maybe after their session, but we want to be able to engage them in this work so that we are able to see their patterns, their problem solving, their storylines, and the things that are really important to them, and then be able to weave in a number of the CBT techniques that we're wanting to introduce. So part of the work may even be teaching them to do something so that you can then engage more in the face-to-face. We had a child and youth worker at one point that taught their children finger knitting so that when they were then doing some of the face-to-face work, they could still be actively moving and engaged, and would have miles worth of yarn and finger knitting after their session, but they were able then to keep them engaged and interested for a much longer period of time. There are going to be a variety of ways that we are able to see and enter into their environment with them if we can imagine ourselves coming into their space and really inviting ourselves and inviting them to take us there. Equally important, though, is the engagement of parents. Children do not coexist separate from their parents, and younger children, as part of an ecosystem, their mental health is not separate from that of their parents, and it's really the system that needs to shift with them. If we just treat the child as if they are the problem to be solved, we unintentionally scapegoat the child and create potential for psychological harm. It additionally uninvites the adults. That may not be our intention, but the adults themselves may need encouragement, support due to their own stories or skills that they may not have. And in the past, while these children would have then also been with teachers, with other individuals in their environment, it is now solely the adults in their environment or the other siblings in their environment who are going to be co-regulating with them. It's really critical that we have the adult to co-regulate with the child. And so treating a child may actually require treating the parent. And you might have a parent who's really reluctant to that, so you may not talk about treating the parent, but it may be bringing them in as an ally, bringing them in as a support. And if they're part of the session, if we have them co-regulating and matching and learning those skills with the youth, they too are learning something that they can take away and practice and then cue and support their child. An excellent question that had come through is, in what situations should I not be providing care? And I think if we think about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, safety and support is needed before treatment can be beneficial. That doesn't mean that treatment isn't critically important and that we as partnering agencies don't wish that treatment could begin right away. But if a child is not in a safe environment, if there is insufficient food, if there is insufficient stability in the home environment, or even that they can stay in that apartment or home, that needs to be taken care of before treatment can actually be beneficial. If a child is hungry, if they're not in a safe space, if they're distracted, then treatment at the very least is not going to be effective. Another fantastic question that had come through had been about group care, but group care in these very high-risk situations. I would really say assessing and managing risky situations is key to determining if group work is even feasible. We are running many groups these days, and quite successfully, from DBT skills groups to anxiety to working just around some of the concerns of COVID, depression groups where the focus is on depression. But if someone is struggling to regulate their emotions, individual work may really still be required prior to group readiness. They may alternatively be able to attend a group situation if there are supports in their environment. Some of our DBT skills groups benefit from having both the client and that caring support person learn from the skills, so that there is an external brain or a support that can help walk the person through the use of the skills in vivo and then between sessions. I know some of the challenges that I've heard a number of staff having is that it's difficult, and even in these kinds of meetings or when we're in multi-partner situations, it's difficult to watch all the individuals in a group session virtually. Best practice then would include screening our clients very well before that. Proactive planning, though, I think it goes back to something that Dr. Gandhi had talked about, is being prepared for the unexpected high-risk situation. Do I have a colleague who can step aside and call the client by phone, separating them from the group? Do I know how to connect and shut down the client from the group portion if they've become very escalated and if they're really having trouble monitoring? And yet being able to come back to the group to talk about how somebody is working with the other person. There's the need for the whole group to know that they are safe, that the other individual is safe, and that we're able to continue to work and support them online. These are skills that we wouldn't use in physical proximity necessarily, and they can seem new or somewhat daunting when moving online. But I would really say that if we're prepared and if we think about those really high-risk situations ahead of time, that's really critical. Just being able to as well prepare myself and care for myself following that high-risk situation is really important in order to be able to provide that work well and the sustainability of that work. Having knowledge of my own scope of practice, knowledge of safety plans, backup for myself are critical. And an access to a manager or a colleague for resource support during those situations is important for the sustainability, especially when we see these safety measures being continued beyond right now. It's when I feel stretched beyond my ability or feeling alone in my practice that I can become fatigued, and just really that importance of knowing how I can have that support following and even during the situation of high risk. Hazen, I'm going to turn it over to you, just looking at troubleshooting some of the problems when delivering that virtual care in a high risk situation.
Michelle and Hazen, sorry to jump in, but we're actually going to ask Hazen if he could just in a Q&A write down the responses to the questions that were raised in this area, just in the interest of time. Hazen was going to be speaking to troubleshooting issues. How do you deal with technological issues? How do you deal with attendance issues? But Hazen, if you're okay with that, well, I'll just ask you to fill those pieces in the Q&A and make those available to folks that way. And we'll flip over to Michelle and Michelle to close us out around self-care and making sure that we're all taking care of ourselves as people that are delivering services at this time.
So maybe I'll just add one bullet point and then turn it over to yourself, Michelle Bates. I think one of the key pieces that we're really walking delicately around is that we have that challenge of first setting up the virtual capacity to link in with each other, whereas we used to be able to just go down the hall and speak with a colleague when we've finished up a high-risk situation. And really being able to differentiate between debriefing, venting, and self-care. And I think it's really going to be important as we walk through this and as we look at a longer span of care and the need for mental health services over the next number of months and years following a pandemic, is how do I vent when I need to? How do I debrief? And then how do I engage in self-care? If I am debriefing and engaged in self-care, then it's with the intent for the care of myself and my colleagues, and really being able to maybe have some conversations following today with one another about when am I just needing to let loose, but that may not be then taking an intentional, mindful way of taking care of myself and being aware of what that costs my colleagues when I just vent, and how do I differentiate that? How can we find a healthier mindset? How can I acknowledge that I've done all that I can and it's not enough, and yet that's all that we can do right now? I want to give credit where it's due. We've engaged with Dr. McLaughlin, who really assists some complex residential facilities in Toronto area. And she had just raised with us the other day is that if we are selling Big Macs and we are asked to serve at McDonald's a client who's asking for a Whopper, what do I do? And that can be one of the largest emotional tolls or emotional drains on us, because it places us as providers in an impossible situation. We have a client or another provider who's wanting something from us and we can't provide it. And so the importance to find the clarity of the expertise of the work that we do and serve that well. So if I am an agency that provides McDonald's, to have the confidence and the privilege of serving McDonald's, but knowing that I cannot serve a Whopper from my desktop there, and really looking at what supports do I need from my colleagues and from my supervisors in order to continue to serve what I have prepared myself for well, what is within my scope of practice, and what we're able to do. And then working with my partners to collaborate to serve those other menu of items that our clients are looking for. It's really been a privilege working with this team, and I'm going to turn that over to Michelle Bates.
Thanks, everyone. So a few additional ideas related to self-care. So one is I invite you to think about what is different in virtual care from a self-care perspective. So we've heard of the new phrase, Zoom fatigue. I experience it on a daily basis. Isolation, and also access to team members. For example, in school settings, as social workers, we have comfort in knowing that there are other adults around our students 5 hours a day. In virtual care, when schools are closed, we don't have that. So we are being challenged to think about what are other ways to create a wraparound and other team members who can be reaching out to clients as well. We also know, I think it's important as a manager, that we talk about the awareness and acknowledgement of self-care and how this continues to be important. For example, what is our conversation related to breaks and balance? We can ask staff about our schedules. We can even look at their online calendars. Are there days full of back-to-back contact with students? In schools, everyone always says, well, I'm run off my feet. We know that. However, in a virtual world, we don't get the same opportunity to, have a break, do 4 deep breaths as a student is being called down, or we get a break when we connect with a colleague. So it's really important to be asking ourselves and asking our staff, how are they building in breaks between direct client sessions? Another way to support self-care of staff is to focus on communication, compassion, and connection. So maybe we need to increase the frequency of our contact or support with staff. Can we send a quick email of encouragement? Can we share an article or funny video about virtual meetings? We also need to intentionally ask staff about self-compassion. So we need to listen carefully for words and sentiments that indicate a sense of judgment or uncertainty about the care or the conflict that people feel about the care that they are providing. So now I'll turn it over to Purnima.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle, and thanks to all of the panelists for sharing your, your really, really valuable expertise and experiences with us today. Just a couple of closing comments to folks. You will be receiving an evaluation in your inbox shortly. We'd love to hear what you liked, where you think we can improve next time around, and what you'd like to learn more about in terms of virtual care. As you know, this is a series that we're trying to put on for you folks, both through the pandemic, but even post-pandemic. And so recognizing that virtual care is becoming very much a part of everybody's life and likely to stay that way for some time. So please do tell us what areas you'd like to learn more about, and we'll try to pull the right experts together like the ones we'd have pulled together today. So thank you so much to the experts. I would love to now ask Joanna and Kathy, first Joanna, then Kathy, to say a few closing remarks.
Thank you very much, Purnima, and thank you to our speakers. I think this today has really demonstrated the value of learning together as a community across sectors, of learning from each other, of learning together. We are not in this alone. These are very difficult times. If you have any questions, you have ideas, you have things you want us to address, please drop us an email, drop us a note, type it in the chat box, and we'll do our best to continue to learn together. I'll turn it over to Kathy now.
Thanks so much, Joanna. And I just want to thank everyone again for joining us today, and a special thanks to the panelists for working so hard to answer the many questions that were posed in this challenging area of work. Hope everyone has a great day, and again, thanks for joining. Bye.